For the first time in 4 years, the dollar appears to have made a sustained break over 100 yen. This might make the Japanese pretty happy, but what does it mean for the rest of the world? Paul Hannon is here with me. Paul, it is interesting, this move by the dollar yen. It's not only a case of yen weakness, but also a case of dollar strength.
Yeah, it's a combination of two different factors. One is obviously the Bank of Japan's provision of massive stimulus announced in April. There are just more yen around, so its value is bound to fall. But it also reflects a change in sentiment towards the US, I think, following payrolls numbers and other recent indicators that the economy there is picking up. And what that has led to is an expectation that the time left remaining for the Fed's QE program is perhaps shorter than people had previously thought. Again, that means a smaller supply of dollars.
Okay, for the Japanese, relatively good news. This is what basically the Bank of Japan was trying to do: push the yen down, help Japanese exporters, and also encourage inflation to get Japan back on its feet. But, that comes at a cost to everybody else, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it's interesting what you said about their motivation. I mean, if their goal was to push the yen down, that would be definitely a problem with everybody else. We've just heard from US Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew, who's in town ahead of the G7 meeting, and he said that as long as what the BOJ is doing is domestically focused to stimulate growth there to try and hit this new high inflation target, fine. If they start going into the territory where they're deliberately trying to engineer a competitive advantage through a currency move, then not so fine. That's the stated policy of the G20. So it's as much about intentions as outcomes. I mean, everybody accepts that a stimulatory monetary policy will weaken your currency, but that is not supposed to be the primary aim of the policy.
I like the way you put that, but it's quite interesting because the architect of this policy, Mr. Kuroda himself, was just out basically saying everything's fine and cool.
Yeah, he's just been speaking to reporters up in Buckinghamshire where the G7 are going to meet this afternoon, and he was saying, like, look, I can explain this again to my G7 colleagues just to reassure them. What we're doing here is primarily focused on boosting domestic growth. It is not intended to weaken the yen. Now, it's all about trust.
But it's it's going to happen. That's all part of it, part and parcel of it.
Yeah.
So this means that it's actually, in a sense, bad news for the US and bad news for the Eurozone exporters, who are actually going to have to compete against the Japanese exporters with this different adjustment in the exchange rate.
Well, it may well be in the short term. It's difficult to judge these things because, again, as Mr. Liu was keen to emphasize, what the US and what Europe, what everybody needs is every bit of the global economy to be growing. Japan obviously has a long-term issue with growth. It's a very significant part of the global economy. If this works, if it gets the Japanese economy back on its feet again, then it's good for Europe and good for the US. The same with Europe. I mean, if Europe was to return to growth, something that Mr. Liu is very keen to see, it would be good for Japan, it would be good for the US.
So basically, as long as it's encouraging global growth, that's seen as a good thing.
Yes, exactly.
Paul, thank you.